It's new, could lead to very serious other negative consequences. These are a few that I mentioned.
Before we go further into the consequences of demographic winter, let us first explore the causes. How did we get here?
Why did fertility decline so much? I mean, that's the $64,000 question, as we say. I wouldn't say we know all the reason by a long shot, but I think we know, and evidence suggests some of the very important reasons. One is the growing value of the time of mothers, working mothers, educated mothers.
The more successful women become in the workplace before they have their children, the higher the opportunity costs when they have their kids. So it's harder to leave work.
So they don't want to spend as much time having children as participating in the labor force and doing other things. That's clearly been important. Well, the causes, you can see how some of the causes are very closely related to the economy, and those are not necessarily bad factors, like the growing education of women, very good. Women now have higher education than men in the United States. Many more women are enrolled in college than men, so that's one consequence. A second very important factor, richer countries have more money to spend, but they also have greater aspirations because they're in richer economies. They want to spend more on themselves, adults, and they want to spend more on their children.
Affluence doesn't just mean that we buy more stuff. It means that we also want to live our lives as individuals as opposed to being in large groups.
So what they do is they have fewer children and invest more in each child.
When you look at all of the social science data, there seems to be one predictor that explains fertility levels better than any other, and that is desired family size, as expressed by women who are so surveyed.
Economists tell us that as countries and individuals become prosperous, they tend to desire fewer children.
I think the sexual revolution is the most profound event of the 20th century, quite honestly. It may even be the most profound event of modern history.
There definitely was a sexual revolution, and you can see it very clearly in women's reports of their lives. If you talk to women who came of age in 1960 and later, a much higher proportion will have been sexually active before marriage with somebody they did not marry.
There's no denying that once we began to travel down the road toward gender equality and all the other changes associated with it, including birth control, everything changed.
Women who came of age after about 1960 have more partners, are more likely to divorce, more likely to have worked than women who came of age in the 40s, the 30s, 40s, or 50s. Behavior changed. The world changed in ways that affected the choices people made about sex and marriage and childbearing and work.
And most notably, I believe, the family changed.
For multiple reasons, social scientists believe that the sexual revolution had both direct and indirect effects on fertility decline.
The one thing that's least discussed in our nation is the rising rate of cohabitation, non-marital cohabitation. Cohabiting couples tend to have fewer children than married couples, and it also pushes the age of marriage up and up. And one of the biggest reasons for the low fertility is people have children too late.
There's some research that suggests that the change to no-fault divorce led to an increase in the divorce rate of something like 20%. The divorce revolution has really meant that neither men nor women can count on their spouse being there next year. The risk of divorce that a couple faces decreases the chances they'll have another child.
One final cause. Various assumptions had huge impacts on the number of children that were desired. We will look at one of those.
I think it's quite natural for people who live on a planet whose dimensions are fixed to have impressed upon their consciousness the idea that we live in a world with real limits.
I can understand why the ordinary man in the street would be a little bit wary about grandiose population predictions. After all, the last thing I ever heard from demographers was we were on the throes of this population bomb.
Human numbers on the planet, the 20th century, almost quadrupled, we think. And over this same period of time, the international inflation-adjusted price of rice and wheat and corn dropped by about 70%.
The population bomb was popularized by non-demographers and by the press back in the 70s, and real demographers, even back then, knew this world was coming that I'm talking about.
As a society, we don't like to talk about the causes of fertility decline. We don't want to possibly offend other people. The really chilling thing about demographic winter is that none of these causes could be easily fixed. It's who we are, who we have become increasingly in these postmodern times.
We came up in 1988 with an extremely simple indicator. I found it because I had the S&P 500 long-term on one side of my desk and the birth chart for the baby boom on the other side, and I realized the charts looked identical, put them together, 45 to 50-year lag. Take 1961, which was the peak year of baby boom births before births turned down, and add 48, the average spending, that gives you a peak around late 2009. So it really is that simple. Baby boomers earn and spend more money till around late 2009, and then they slowly earn and spend less money, and the stock market simply follows that, because it's not their savings and investment habits that drive the stock market, which some economists think. It's spending, because spending drives the earnings of companies.
A third problem is investments in medical, in new technologies for medicine and other ways. That's partly contingent on having a lot of potential consumers.
The projections for Western Europe are that the group 30 to 44 years of age is going to drop very significantly in size.
When you have declining number of consumers at different ages, you discourage research and development, productivity growth, which is the engine, fundamentally the engine of growth in any economy.
Why does that in particular matter? Because over the last century, it's people between the ages of 30 and 44 in all developed countries who've disproportionately been the innovators.
It seems a strange thing, with population growth so important to society, that we never hear about that side of the story. Could it be that we are simply not comfortable with how that story unfolds?
Young men are no longer motivated to marry and assume marital responsibilities for the sake of sexual gratification.
This new period of life has not been as good for men.
This is something that's readily available anyway.
Men have a harder time growing up, I think, without women than women do without men.
So if you're having a situation like in Europe where people are marrying at a very, very late age, and I mean 30, 29 years old for men and women, we have many, many people in the age of 25, 30, even 35 and more who are staying with their parents and are not forming families.
I call them child men. They are gamers, you know, spending 2+ hours a day playing video games.
We have a lot of especially cohabiting relations.
Reading Maxim magazine with all the silliness in there, watching cartoons on the Cartoon Network.
The male has no plans for marriage with this particular person. It's simply an arrangement of convenience.
Well, of course, it has a huge impact on fertility because people are delaying their first child. They're delaying marriage and then they're delaying their first child.